Okay, gewaltig. Zok the Heilige Gemara. Echot Koche Kochem, Ven Kochem Kalam are both covered by this rule that you have to wash the pots out. Tanu Rabban, Chatos. When the pasuk tells us this halacha, it's talking about a chatos. Daber alaharin velbon of lemer zoishtar sachatos. El koim asher tishchet zoilu tishochet achatos lefnei Hashem kodesh kodeshim. So only alachatos. I would assume this only applies to achatos. Kol hakodeshim minayim. How do you know that this halacha of mariko or shtifa applies to all kodesh? Tabelemer kodesh kodeshim. To tell us that it refers to all kodesh kodesh. Yogal shani marbe said truma. I would have thought that truma also, if you cook it in a pot that has to be washed out, you need mariko or shtifa. Tabelemer oisa. Prat la truma, it excludes truma from this halacha divrei Rabbi Yehuda. B'shimin omer kodesh to the mariko shtifa, but kodeshim kalam einon to unin mariko shtifa. Yochsev kodesh kodeshim. That's kodeshim in kodeshim kalam loy. Frankly, my time with Rabbi Yehuda, what is this for Rabbi Yehuda, who says that it includes kodeshim kalam, just not truma? Truma. The Baal Torah is to tell us don't include truma. Mechlal, we can deduce the kodeshim kalam to unin mariko shtifa. Rabbi Shimon HaMalach, Oisa is not being Mamai Truma. Why would I need Oisa to be Mamai Truma if even Kodeshim Kalam don't need it? So surely Truma wouldn't. What do I need Oisa for? Kidde Amrina. What did we say? We had a machlokes on our Mishnah. If the chatos was possible, does its dam need to be washed out of a beggar or not? And we said that the Mishnah holds, if it's possible, whether or not it had a shasa kosher, which is Reb Shimon, whether or not it had a shasa kosher, it doesn't matter. If it's possible, it doesn't have all these rules. While we had another shita, I think it was Reb Kiva shita, who held that even if it's possible, but if it had a shasa kosher, it still needs mariko shtifa. So I saw lemute apsula, even if it had a shasa kosher, as Rashi says, oisa kedam moran, oisa ksher v'le psula. The afker Reb Shimon l'il, chata shoysa shasa kosher v'nifsala, also is excluded from this halach. Period. So that explains the machlik. Frank the Gemara. Utruma loy boy shtifa marika. Are you out? You tell me that truma does not need it? Well, Tanya, we learned in a brayso. Kedera shebishal babaser, a pot in which you cooked meat. Loy yavashal b'chalav. You're not allowed to cook milachiksit. Vim bishal. What if you cooked chalav in it? V'nois and tam. You would have to analyze this milk. Is there a taste of basar in it? Which we know is shishim. But true, and the same thing with truma. Truma lo yivashal b'chulin. Vim bishel b'nois and tam. Amar Abaye lo yitzricha ela l'da amar mar bishel b'mixes kli. What if you only cooked in part of the keli? Ton mariko shtifa kala kli. The halacha of mariko ushtifa is that even if you only cooked in a part of the keli, the gzeres hakosov is that the whole keli requires mariko ushtifa. Ha-truma, but truma, all it needs is hagala to take out the blias of truma. Therefore, loitzarech alamakam bishul, you only need to make hagala in the places where there are blias of truma. That's one chiluk. Rav Amar, another chiluk. Loitzricha ela l'da amar mar. B'mayim v'loy b'yayin, b'mayim v'loy b'mosuk. The gzeres because of mariko shtifa dictate that it has to be only with water. But to make hagala, you can actually use wine or even mosuk. We don't. We use that water that has detergent in it to passel it. But technically, hagala you can make afilu b'yayin v'afilu b'mosuk. And Rabbi Bar Ula Amar Latricha El Amar Mar Mariko Shtifa B'Tzainin. Mariko Shtifa has to be done with hot water. Hagala can be done with. Mariko Shtifa has to be done with cold water. Hagala could be done with hot water. Ha Afilu B'Chamen. That would be really good if that's what the case is. El Lamanda Mariko B'Chamen and Shtifa is B'Tzainin. Michael Memer. So Gemara Shtifa is there also. That's the difference. The difference is that if it was kosher, you need to do shtifa. If it's truma, you do not. The Baltic. Zok the Heilige Mishnah weiter. Rab Tarfon says, Bishel mitchilas haregel. You start cooking shlomims, everyone's bringing shlomims a whole yom tov. That's the meat that they ate. So what if you cooked a shlomim in a pot at the beginning of yom tov? Yivashal by kol haregel. At the end of the next day, it becomes nicer. no problem. You can continue cooking it. It doesn't become nicer. As soon as this man achila is over for the carbon, now there's bliss of nicer, you would have to make marika shtifa. Marika ke marika sakos. Marika means like in Yiddish we say oshvenkin the kois, to rinse it out on the inside. Ushtiva ke shtifa sakos, which is on the outside. And marika ushtika shtifa betzainin, as we just quoted one shita, right? Hashvud via ashkala. What about a spit? Magilon macham, and you do hagala. So you're going to ask me if you cooked with it with tzli, shouldn't you need libon? So there's a discussion about this. And there are those who say that bishas, when you use the shvud and the askala, it was heter. It wasn't niser. It wasn't nicer yet. There, even hagala would work. That's one of the shittas, but there's a lot of talk about this. Zoktamer, my time of Rav Tarfon, who hold that it doesn't become nicer until the end of Yom Tov. The Yom Kra says in the pasuk, "Ufanisa ba'boiker v'alachta lo yalach." The Torah says that after Yom Tov you go back home. Zokt Rashi, al korchach boiker shalchel ka'amar. It must be referring to not the second day Yom Tov or the first day Yom Tov. Those that didn't have a second day. It's not referring to the morning of the Yom Tov. It's obviously referring to the next day, the Chalamayit. The kari le boiker rishon. Yet it's called boiker rishon. So it's fanisa ba'boiker v'alachta lecha. You're but a first night sukkah, so but a first night Pesach. And so you'll go home in the morning, but it doesn't mean you're going to go home the next morning. It means you're going to go home the second morning. Chalamayit. Hakasav asa n'chulan boiker. Do you know why? Because the Torah looks at the entire Yom Tov like it's one big boiker. So therefore, lagabi noiser, it doesn't become noiser till the next morning. The next morning doesn't happen until the end of Yom Tov. It's called the time machine. The time stands still. For the Gemara, if you're going to say that time stands still, pigel means I had kavana to make this rikas adam tomorrow or the day after. That shouldn't be a problem because it's still in the same day. Are you going to tell me there's no such thing as noiser? And you're going to say, yeah, there's taka no pigel and no noiser because it's all one day. Vatanya of Nasa Noimer, Loy Omer Rabbeinu Tarfon, Elazubavad, he only said it legabe mariko shtifa. But of course it becomes noiser. Of course it becomes pigel. So what's the deal? It can't all be considered one day. Because if it's one day, it should apply equally to pigel and noiser as it does to shtifa. Ella, that's not pshat and Rav Tarfon. You know, pshat and Rav Tarfon is much more practical. Ella chad Rav Nachman Amar Rabba Baravua, Amar Rav Nachman Amar Rabba Baravua, Kol Yoim v'Yoim Nasa Giyu L'Chaverei. When you cook the shlomim in it on day one, so it's allowed to be cooked on day two. It's not nicer yet. On day two, you cook another shlomim. When you cook the other shlomim, it sucks everything out, and now it resets the clock. I'm sorry. Yeah, but the shlom that you shechted tomorrow, you have another day. So it's sort of when you cook in it on day two, it sucks out the bliss from day one, and now it replaces it with the bliss of day two. The one from day two you can use on day three too, and then on day three you do another shlom. So, Frek Rashi, what if someone brought a chatos? You have to make sure that the last carbon of the day that you cook in this pot is going to be a shlom.
They had labels on the pot.
They must have had your labels, yeah. Okay, Zokt Gemara weiter. V'chalchamim ma'imim ad zman achila. Ad zman achila mriku shtifa. My carbon, what exactly does he mean? Omer Rav Nachman, Omer Rabba Baravua. It means mamtin lo ad zman achila. Wait until it becomes nicer. V'hader avid lo mriku shtifa. And that's when you should make marika ushtifa. Zog Tosfos, ein lefarish the marika ushtifa kodim sheyasa noiser kidei shelo yevoyu kachem leveis psul. You might say maybe make the marika ushtifa before it becomes nicer to avoid the psul. No, you don't do that. The mash mahacha the la'acher is man achila after it's already belias of noiser in the pot. Only then, Ovid Marika Ushtifa. Umiu yesh shvarim degarsi mamtin lu ad zman achila. Not kol zman achila. Ad zman achila. V'yoy yesh k'tzas ledaktek midikamer le'il l'Rab Tarfon. We said earlier, according to Rab Tarfon, kol yoim v'yoim nasa gil l'chaveroi. Im koidim shenasa noiser, Ovid Marika Ushtifa, if you're going to make Marika Ushtifa before it becomes noiser, Hachanami la'avid dechibashel beishlamim esmol kishaba yoim v'huskak l'meriko shtifa. When you cooked shlamim mini yesterday, now today you're going to need meriko shtifa. Ibashel beishlamim v'del idna kaidim meriko shtifa litzru. Maybe it should be usher. Maybe it should be usher because the meriko shtifa doesn't work before. The whole mitzvah to exercise a kosa, that meriko shtifa happens after it becomes nicer. Zog to Gemara weiter. Minan immediately. Rabbi Yochanan Abba Yosy ben Abba. It says in the pasuk umoyrak v'shotaf. You have to rinse it out. Uksiv in that same parsha kol zachar ba'kayhanim yoichad. Who is it eaten by? The kayhanim. But you see, it's connected to this manachila. Haketzad mamtin la ad manachila v'hadar ovid la merika ushtifa. Rashi says, why did the Torah put Meriko Shtifa right near, talking about the Kol Zocher B'Kanim miracle? They say, in order to do your Meriko Shtifa. Meriko Kamerika Sakois, Shtifa Kashtifa Sakois. Taner Rabbanan, Meriko Shtifa B'Tzayin Diver Rebbe, Nachamar Meriko B'Chavan Shtifa B'Tzayin, like we had on the base. This was referenced. My time of Rabbanan, what is for the Rabbanan that it's Meriko B'Chavan Shtifa B'Tzayin? It's like Gi'ulei Oivdei Kechava. So Rashi, the Chamin Ba'inon, you need hot. So you can't do everything, but Tzayin, you need it to be done with heat. I'm not talking about a Gala. We're talking about kashering. We're talking about, in addition to the Agala that you would have to do anyway, this is an added requirement. Hikamina l'meriko shtifa the basar agala. Avadi you got to do agala. Besides the agala, you got to do the meriko shtifa. For Rabbanon im kain, if it's the agala and then the meriko shtifa, im kain is a question tervayu chadahi that you need both. Meriko lav hainu agala. Meriko is not the agala. There's a separate agala that's done first. Lichtov kra loshain shava b'shnei. Im kain lichtov kra either a moirek or shoytev shoytev. Umark we should have clearly is mashma. There's two different things happening. One's chamin and one's soinin. Because if they're both soinin, it should have used the same lashon. My umark v'shoitif. Why did it change its expression? Shemamina marikas b'chamin ushtifa b'tsoinin. The Rebbe, you couldn't use the same lashon twice, even though they're both was cold. Because ikzav umark havamina trey zimri mayrik. Either 2 times mayrik or 2 times, which is Morik would be on the inside, or Trizmish are 2 on the outside. We would know it's one's on the inside and one's on the outside. The Kachtem and Morik B'Shoyte V'Loy Malach Kamarita Kamarika Sakais on the inside, Shtiva Keshiva Sakais on the outside. Zog Tehillah Mishnah. Bishel Boy Kachim V'Chulin. You cooked in a pot Kachim and Chulin together. Oy Kachim V'Kachim Kalam. Or a Chatas and a Shlomim, for instance. If you could taste the kachim in the chulam, or if you could taste the kachim in the kachim column, you could taste the chatos in the shlomim. Now, if it's the same type of meat, I guess you'd have to do with the shishim. That means the chulam took on the properties of the chatos. That means the shlomim took on the properties of the chatos. Now we have a very puzzling comment. Why not? If it took on the properties of the chatas. Rokik shenaga berokik. This is like a matzah that touched a matzah, meaning let's say a mincha, a korban mincha that touched a regular piece of chulin, or v'chaticha, a piece of meat that touched a piece of meat. Loy kol rakikin v'loy kol chaticha shasur. So it doesn't answer the whole thing. It only answers the area right that got absorbed. Then you also el b'mokim shabala. I don't understand. If you're saying that the kachim infects the kachim column or the chulin, and it's as if it's that thing, how could you say the einan talunim meriko shtifa? Zog to Gemara hachikama. Im yesh ben benoisen tam harei akal nachol techamurim utaunin meriko shtifa poisel mamarba. It takes on the identity of a chatas. But what it's missing is ein bahen v'noisen tam, then ein akal v'nacholin kechamurim, and vein to unim riku shtifa, and vein poislin b'mag.
The same kabbanas, the same type of meat.
Is it the same type of animal?
Yeah.
It could possibly be.
Could be.
Well, Mechatas has to be a female, but I don't think there's a difference in taste between a female animal and a male animal. Zok Gemara, Nehida Kachi Kachim Lebo. Okay, in the case where Kachi Kalim, a shlomim, absorb taste from Mechatas, right? So let's say it did not absorb enough. Let's say it was Ein Ben Benoshentav, right? So what did it say? It says that it doesn't need Riku Shtifa. Why not? Doesn't Kachim Kalim need Riku Shtifa? According to the Madam holds it needs it. So Zok to Gemara, Kachim Kalim Niboy. Why do you say the Ein Tzarach Riku Shtifa? It might not need it in the same way the Chatas after 1 day, Shlom needs after 2 days, but you still need it. My Ein Tu'unin, Diklamar, you know what the Mishnah means when it says Ein Tu'unin? It means it doesn't need on the schedule of Kachim, but Avada needs on the schedule of Kachim Kalim, of Kachim Kalim Tu'unin. And Abai would say that the Mishnah is saying that we paskin like not like Reb Shimon. Reb Shimon says it doesn't apply to Kachim Kalim. Right? We paskin not like Reb Shimon. I think it's like Reb Kiva, who says it even applies like Reb Yehuda. We just had him, who says it does apply to Kachim Kalim, and that's why it sticks in Kachim Kalim, because in fact there is a din Riko Shiva of Kachim. But Rabbi says no. Hamani Reb Shimoni. The Amar Kachim Kalim ain tunin Riko Shtifa. It's talking according to Reb Shimon. And if the kachim kalim was cooked with kachim, and the kachim kalim does not have the taste of kachim, the shlom doesn't have the taste of the chatas, you don't need miku shtifa at all, because kachim kalim doesn't need miku shtifa. The yomar kachim kalim and tunim miku shtifa. So according to Rava, I understand. Hain de katani oy kachim kalim. There's 2 cases in the Mishnah. It's really redundant. Basically, the halach is if it has the taste of the kachim, it has the din of the kachim. If not, no. Why do I need an example of chulun and an example of kachim kalim? But according to Rava, it would be very important because the Mishnah wants to tell you we pass like Reb Shimon. Elul Abaye Tarta Lamali. Why do we need both cases? Zok Gemara Tzrichi. You know why? The Itana. If we only had the case of kachim v'chulun, havamina chulun hu demevatl kachim. If the chulun does not have the taste of kachim, yes, it will be mevatl the kachim, and it won't take on the properties of the chatos. You know why the lav minayu? It's min b'sheini min as far as its halachic status. It's chulun, and it will clash with the kachim. The kachim kalim, which are very much in the same class, emaloi. Maybe the kachim kalim won't be able to reject or repel the kachim. We tell the kachim kalim, havamina kachim hudalimi levtulei kachim. Kachim has an identity. It has an identity that can repel another identity. But chulun, which is open, it's like an open sesame. Chulun emaloi tricha. That's why both cases were mentioned. Rokik, shegi berokik, and chaticha, shenaga bechaticha, it doesn't infect the whole chaticha if they're dry, just the area around it. Taner Rabbanan, kol asher yiga, it says in the pasuk. So let's have a look at the pasuk so we know what we're darshaning. Kol asher yiga bivisara yiktosh. That's the most important line that we're focusing on. Kol asher yiga bivisara yiktosh. Zok the Gemara. Taner Rabbanan, kol asher yiga yachal afilu shlei ba'al. You might think merely touching, even though there's no absorption done between them. It has to be in the meat. It's got to penetrate the meat. Ad sheyivla bivisara. Yochal noga b'miktas chaticha yekulei pasul. You would have thought that if it just touches part of the meat, it'll infect and pasul the whole thing. Talmud Omer yiga, meaning hanagea pasul, that touched the carbon will be pasul. So how does this work exactly? Okay, that. All you do is you cut off the area that absorbed. Exactly how deep the penetration was, you'll have to ask the cooks how that works. Bivisara, right? It's called shiga bivisara. It had to have touched meat, not these other parts of the animal. Yikdash, meaning liyos kamaya. It takes on the same properties as what it absorbed. If it absorbed from the parcel of carbon, then you treat it like a parcel of carbon. It's got to get burnt. Viksheri, and if it's kosher, then toichel kachamer shabah. It should be eaten like the chomer shabah. So if it's chulun, you'll eat it like the kachim. If it's kachim kalim and kachim, then you'll eat it in the schedule of the chatas. Freit the Gemara, amai. If it became parcel, let's think about it. If it became parcel, so there's a lav that Rashi tells us, the Gemara teaches us in second parak of Psachim, it says, Kol Shabbat Kodesh Posel Bo Akosav Litin Loisasa Alachilasa. There is a loisasa to eat kachim that's possible. But there's an aseh to eat your shlomim. There's an aseh to eat the shlomim. It says, V'achlu sabasar, balai lazeh. At the kind of Pesach. Well, there's a mitzvahs achila. It says, V'achlu oisam. Where does it say in Tesavir? It says, V'achlu oisam asher kubar bahem. There's a mitzvah achilas kachim. So you have an aseh, you have a loisasa. So why do you say you don't eat it? Why do you say it's possible? Amai v'neise aseh. The litchis loisasa. The aseh v'chilas kachim should be doche the loisasa that asers you to eat. Amarava, Eina say that the kasha is, it's not a kasha where every parcel of carbon you should be able to eat. The parcel of carbon, there's no more mitzvah to eat. Right. But here it's a kasha, the shloimim is kosher. So there's some chatas in there, but the lemaisa.
That's something maybe.
So there are those who ask, if you're telling me that it becomes like the chatas, so then it's like a parcel of carbon.
What's the kasha?
Right? So does he bring down from Achronim in different source? He bring down from Ralchanan that even if you say that the shlom becomes like a chatas, it's not mamash like a chatas. It's also like the chatas, but it's not mamash the chatas. So therefore, it still has the mitzvah sachila on it, and therefore v'neise aseh v'litches loisase. Amarava, the answer is that this rule that we think applies everywhere does not apply everywhere. Ein aseh doiches loisase shebemikdash. In the base of mikdash, you don't have that rule, and I'll prove it to you that by karbonis you say ein aseh doiches loisase. Shenemar, we know there's a halacha by the carbon Pesach.
We don't say
we don't say aseh doiches loisase. That's right.
Oh yeah.
Shenemar, it says about the carbon Pesach that etzem loisish pruva. You're not allowed to break a bone in the carbon Pesach. Zok Shimon ben Asher, that's not only a bone without marrow inside it, even a shmaka marach bone to be nishdessen. Shimon ben Asher, echad etzem sheish pemoyach, v'echad etzem shein pemoyach. But you might ask a kasha. There's a mitzvah of achilas Pesach. It says v'achlu sabasar b'lai lazeh. So my neis I say to eat every bit of meat, even the marrow, v'litches loisase, and it should be doiche the asay of etzem loisish pruva. Elo yevarai from here that ein asay doiche loisase shebavit.
The mitzvah is achilas carbon Pesach, and you have a specific loisase.
Yeah, but the Doche speaks out. Maybe the loisase is referring to bones that don't have marrow inside it.
How do you know that? Where's the?
Because there's a mitzvah to eat. So maybe you should only not break bones. That's what it says. The second time, the Tosh bringing that like more. It says that's why it says that again. Saaseh Pesach Rishon, Saaseh Pesach Sheni, to tell you that even if there's meat inside it, that's where Shimon Nasha gets it from. But Akal Ponim bought it says hey the chalosis. So if you think about it, it's a little bit difficult because when would you say aseh dechalisa if the action of doing the aseh is violating the loisa? Right. Exactly. But here you're violating the loisa and you didn't do any mitzvah yet. You're violating the loisa and then later on you're eating the marrow. So how could you say aseh dechalisa there? So there's a lot of scenarios where this would be relevant. I just can't think of any off the top of my head where we say aseh dechalisa even though it's not one right after the next. Exactly. Right. It has to prove, right? The action comes first. But whatever the case, I don't know how that we didn't get to say the chaloisa. But akalponim, they with the Mefarshim answer, the Achronim talk about it, Rishonim talk about it. But I think there's a Tosfos that says that whenever you have a situation where it's impossible to fulfill the loisase, to fulfill the aseh, without being over the loisase as a prerequisite, even if they don't have it at the same time, it still says say the chaloisa. Why? Because you say the violation of the loisase, they're breaking the bone, was the beginning of the mitzvah. Because in order to do the mitzvah, you got to do that. So therefore, it's like a beginning of the mitzvah. So someone wanted to shtel too. We light our neiros on Erev Shabbos for Chanukah long before the Zman. There's no mitzvah. Yet we make a bracha ladik ner. How can you make a bracha ladik ner? It's not Neshach Chanukah yet. Teretz is, the only way to be Mekayim the mitzvah is to light it now. Therefore, now is also a chelik of the mitzvah we can make ladik ner.
The kasha is that now the kasha is.
Right, but by Kochim you don't say it.
But what about by Chanukah?
By Chanukah,
maybe we should when we come home from shul.
No, because there's a way to be Mekayim the mitzvah without it. I say that is only if you can't be Mekayim it.
Your kasha now raises a better.
Why?
Kasha, because I'm making a bracha at a time when I'm not.
But but since this is a prerequisite to doing a mitzvah, we consider this the beginning of the mitzvah.
Right.
That's why, since it's the beginning of the mitzvah, breaking the bone is also the beginning of the mitzvah.
Why does lech have to stay lit?
That's right. Otherwise, it's not the beginning of the mitzvah.
Right.
It's not a mitzvah at all. That's right. To Zok Gemara weiter. Rabbi Ashi Omar. It was very funny because I felt like I lived in the Beis Hamikdash. I had one little jug of oil. It lasted me 8 days and 8 nights. And then my kids came home and now I got to buy more oil.
At $30 a month.
Rabashi Omar, Rabashi says, Yiktosh. That's an Aseh. So there's not only Aloysia said not to eat the psulim, there's the pasuk of Yiktosh. Called the by Yiktosh we had. So it's an Aseh too, and therefore Ve'in Aseh Doche Loisa Aseh. It's a Loisa and an Aseh. So you don't have to say by Kochim, it's different. Even if by Kochim you also say Aseh Doche Loisa, this is a Loisa Aseh. Zok the Gemara Ashkuchon Chatos. The miskadeshes, I think. What does the Dalit say? The mikadeshes. If chatos touches something, it's mikadeshet. If it's balu and something, you cooked it with something. The Mishnah says it's mikadeshet, right? Actually, chatos the mikadesh bibalu. Shar kochim we know. How do you know this applies to all other kochim as well? Not just the chatos, because that we said only applies to kochim, not kochim kalim. That is, I mean, that's maybe Reb Shimon. Shimon says it only applies to kachim, not kachim kalim.
Right.
But first of all, how do we know it applies to other kachim, right?
It could be other.
Right. So how do you know it applies to all other kachim? Amar Shmuel, we have a huge hekesh that allows us to apply anything that we find by one carbon to all other carbones. Amar Shmuel Mishum Rav Elazar, it says in the pasuk, Zoy Satayra, La'oila, V'la Mincha, V'la Chatas, V'la Osham, V'la Miluim, V'la Zevach HaShlom. It's makish all of the karbonos to each other, and every one of these karbonos has something to teach to the other karbonos that you otherwise wouldn't have known. The focus of our Gemara is lachatos. There's a chiddush that the Torah taught us by chatos, that it's mekadosh b'balua, and it applies to all of these other karbonos, the oila, the mincha, the osham, the milum, and the zevach hashlam. Zog to Gemara. Now let's go through the whole hekesh and let's go through the items one by one to see what lesson do we get from each one of the karbonos on the list. So the first one
And why is it only one?
was lo'ila. I'm sorry?
Why is it only one? It should be everything.
What do you mean?
Than all of these 5.
Right.
Oil and nifla.
Each one of them teaches a lesson to the rest.
But it should teach all of the lessons, like all the.
I mean, whatever halachas you have by it.
Once you have a hekesh, it's an open book.
You see, so there's actually a discussion. Why the Toshes discusses why did you also learn A and B, not only C, or why did you want to learn B and C, not only A? So Toshes talks about it.
Obviously,
He says
otherwise you wouldn't have the whole
you
position.
have to have at least one thing. The other things you could say maybe yes, maybe no, maybe learn from another one. But that's a good point. You would technically be able to learn everything. So Zok Gemara lo'ila, ki oila, ma oila tunakli. Just like the oila needs a keli, I've called to unakli. Frank Gemara, what exactly keli are we talking about? My kli. Elam and Mizrach, if you're going to tell me that the chiddush is that you can't just spritz the blood from the neck of the animal, you have to first be makabel the dam and a Mizrach, that's not a unique halacha to oila. B'shal meitzibur nami ksibuhu vayikach Moshe chatzi adam vayosam ba'ganos. Now these shal meitzibur are actually in the same pasuk of the oila. This is by the Miluim when Moshe Rabbeinu was doing the avodah, and it says over there. I'm sorry, this is by Kabbalah Satira. This is by Kabbalah Satira when Moshe Rabbeinu was makrib and oila and shalmei tzibur, and it says about all of them that they used a keli. So why are you giving credit to oila? That could be shalmei tzibur's contribution to this hekesh. Ella, you know what we're talking about? Keli that it needs? It needs a sakin. What does it mean? It needs a sakin. So if you look, Rashi for here is on Tzadik Ches Amar Aleph. So if we just turn to Tzadik Ches Amar Aleph, we could see the Rashi. Rashi here says sakin l'shchita lafuke tzur v'kana. It has to be a keli, a respectable keli, not a sharpened rock or a reed. The chlisharis bina. That's what we learn from oila. Where do you see that an oila needs to have a proper keli? So the Gemara, the oila gufa minalan, tichsiv by the akeda, vayishlach avram mesyadoi, vayikach es hamacheles, v'hasam oilahu. We know Yitzchak was an oila. How do we know Yitzchak was an oila? Because it says he took the ram, tichsiv vayaleyu la'oila tachas benoi. The ram was brought as an oila instead of his son, so clearly this was a carbonite. Zokra mincha. What is the contribution that mincha makes to the group? Ma mincha inim nechelas elul zichrei kuhuna. Afkol, any one of these lists, and it's talking about shalmei tzibur, not regular shlamim, which is nechom to any bezocher, to any person. Avkol enim necholem elo
Or
l'zichrei
an
kuhuna.
oil, nobody.
That's right. Well, that's why you don't learn it from an oila. Mahi. What are you?
And that's
What
my
exactly?
problem with it. That's my problem with the Zekish. It's not, comparable. So
Well, we're going to see that the limudim that each one is contributing does not necessarily apply to
Apply.
every one of the rest.
This is the Doche that you were trying to say before.
No. The Doche that I was saying before was saying that even though we could, some of the limudim that you learned from Oila, you could have learned from Mincha, but we say we're learning from Oila. But that it's going to be very clear in the Gemara that some of the lessons offered up don't apply to everybody. Like Zevachim, like you said, it wouldn't apply to Oila. So if you're telling me that it's chatas and osham that needs to be the recipient of this information from the mincha, it says beferish by the chatas and osham kol zocher b'kayhanim yechlenu. So I don't need to learn that from mincha. V'shalmei tzibur, and if you're going to tell me that the shalmei tzibur could only be eaten by male kayhanim, and you know that from the hekesh of mincha, there's a pasuk mufurish by shalmei tzibur that we know it from. May rebuyu de krasi, because it says by the shalmei tzibur, b'kodesh hakodeshim teichlenu, kol zocher yoichal oisai, limit al shalmei tzibur she'ein achon elu l'zichrei kahuna. Now, how do you see in that pasuk zichrei kahuna? It says kol zocher yoichal oisai. So we're going to see that in Rashi in a second, but I want to get on to the next Amid. In fact, there's a machlokes tanoim if this limud is valid. Ika, there are tanoim who learn Ika de nafka mehacha, Ika de nafka lemehacha. So yes, if you learn it from the hekesh, you won't be able to learn it from this other limud. So let's just stop and see what it is.
We know, but not mean.
But that it says in Vayikach Kairach. And it also says at the end of that pasuk, and this is the Gemara didn't share with us, it says the Kodesh Yalach. So if you look at the whole pasuk inside, the pasuk says B'Kodesh HaKodeshim Dechlenu Kol Zocher Yoichal Oisai. And then it says Kodesh Yalach. This Kodesh Yalach that's mentioned by Osham and Shalmei Tzibur is extra. The Kodesh Yalach is the same to call Yiserahu Lemelev Shalmei Tzibur that are Kivshei Atzeres, it's not an Kivshei Atzeres, that are Kivshei Atzeres, the Chsiv V'hu Kodesh Yu Lashem L'Koyin. By Shalmei Tzibur, it says, but a Kivshei Atzeres, it says Beferish Kodesh Yu Lashem L'Koyin. So that's how we know that Kodesh Yalach means dafke to Kohan. So Zok Gemara, but that could be a machlokes as to where the source is. Okay, chatos. What do we know from chatos? That's our discussion. Ma chatos, just like a chatos. Shlomi, what flavor is that?
No.
Vanilla. How did your mother say? Vanilla. Did your mother like to say that, right? Vanilla. Oh, your mother? Vanilla. Yeah. Okay. Zok the Gemara. Ma chatos miskadish bebelua. I've called miskadish bebelua. That's how we got into this in the first place. Asham ma asham ain't shvir v'shil yikadosh. And the asham, even if there's a fetus, the parts of the fetus never take on a kedusha. You know why? Because you can't bring a female asham. So obviously the fetus never, right. So we learned from Avkol ain't shvir v'shil yikadosh by even karbonis that could be female, like a shlomim or a chatos. If it has a baby in it, there's no kedusha. There's no kedusha. Now the problem is we know Velat Chatos is Mesos. It has kedusha. So what does that mean? We should learn from here that it doesn't have kedusha. We're learning even to a female Chatos from an asham which is only male. We know that the fetus cannot be kodesh because it can't have a fetus. To a shlom that's female, to a Chatos that's female. So the question is, but we know Velat Chatos is kodesh. So Zok the Gemara, Kasover, it must be that Shmuel holds that the Volod is Kachim, Vaviyosin and Kedushim. Yes, they get a Kedusha after they're born, but while they're in their mother's stomach, they have no Kedusha at all. And therefore, if you shechted the animal, the Emurim, the Chalev from the mother, you got to be Makiv on the Mizbeach, like if it's a Chatas, but not the Chalev of the baby that found inside.
We call it Chatas means that it was born
It's alive.
It's alive.
Yeah. Now, the other questions you might ask, I don't understand. How can you be a raya from Asham that a female's children are not Kodesh? You can't have that by an Asham. So Argamor Masold, the done in Efsher, Mishi Efsher. You could actually make such a libud that I have a raya from Asham, you can't do it. Either it's impossible, but the Mash you can't do it. So that's considered an acceptable Miluim. That's the final carbon over there. What do you learn from there? Now Miluim, Rashi tells us what it's referring to. Miluim is the Miluim was when they brought the karbonis. When they brought the karbonis, when they I think this is could say that this is the Chanukah Shanasim. You could even say that this is the Lublini strikes again. Right, the carbonoi karaskas. They brought all these karbonis. So just like by the Miluyim, the lach was moishrei and b'seifra. If there was noisor, it had to be burned. What does Rashi say over here? But it says no, he doesn't speak about that. But treifa means if it became the ein noisor zeber treifa kedin noisor shel miluyim. The noisor of miluyim means if you shechted it and the meat stayed over too long, so you burn it. So we learn ma miluyim moshreim b'sreifa and the ein balachem b'misroyim. You'll never have a noiser of miluyim that's a live animal. Well, what do we mean? Sometimes when a person is mafresh a chatos, he'll be mafresh a second chatos. Why? Just in case the first chatos goes missing, it's like a plan B insurance policy, right? What happens if he doesn't lose the first animal and the first animal gets shechted? So now you have a secondary chatas, right? So maybe that's like noiser and you have to burn it. So Zok tomorrow. I'm sorry? Yeah, maybe just kill it. Like it should be like a chatas ameses.
Bang, you can keep coming next day.
So the Gemara says, Mami lui mashreim b'sreifa ve'ein balachayim b'mashreim. I've called mashreim b'sreifa ve'ein balachayim b'mashreim, meaning you don't say that a leftover live animal becomes noiser and you destroy it. Rather, you could be pointed. That's what we learn from Miluyim. And Shlomim, what do we learn from Shlomim? Ma Shlomim mefaglin umispaglin. You know where the Torah taught us the entire parsha Pigel? By Shlomim, right? How do we know? Of course we had this before. So how do we know that the didn't Pigel applies to all carbonis? Ma Shlomim mefaglin, it could make Pigel, meaning not only does the animal become also to eat, but then the accessories to the carbon, like the Nesachim, also become also umispaglin, and they become Pigel. Avkol mifaglin umispaglin. So let's look at the Dalid where it would tell us where we learned it before. We had this many times in our Masechta. Where does it say Gimel? This is we're already deep in the Masechta that we're suffering. That we're
you know that rang a bell for me.
Yeah,
it goes both ways.
Yeah. Okay, Baruch Hashem, we finished.
Baruch
It didn't take too long. It was a beautiful, beautiful plot. Come on.
Go ahead.